Salvador Perez is coming off one of his worst offensive seasons in his career. Is he due for a bounce back in 2024? We'll let you know next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can download our podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're also on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. We're about 80 subscribers away from our goal of 1,000 by opening day 2024. And we feel pretty good about reaching that goal because we're going to be at Royals Rally tomorrow, getting some interviews with players, not for a podcast episode, but I'll be live tweeting through a lot of stuff, be able to get you guys some video. So follow along there. But also, I'll be able to talk about it on the podcast next week because next week, things are going to change. We're going to go back to 5 episodes a week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to have you covered from February. What is that going to be? February 5th until December. So we're going to have 10 months of 5 episodes a week. We're going to be very busy and hope to have a fully engaged fan base from spring training all the way until the end of the regular season. So that is our hope for the 2024 Kansas City Royals. Again, you can also check us out on Instagram and TikTok at locked_on_Royals. We're going to be posting a lot more frequently as we get closer to the regular season. We're also going to be down in Surprise, Arizona for a few days of spring training, right around their first workouts. That'll be happening here in about 2 or 3 weeks. So stay tuned on that. We'll be bringing you video. We'll be bringing you podcast episodes from Surprise. Player interviews, going to be a lot of fun down there where the weather is a lot better. Even though it's warmer here in Kansas City, it is really warm down in Arizona right now. So can't wait to get down there and start seeing some live baseball action for the first time this year. Again, you can always reach out to me on Twitter or the YouTube channel for questions. This will be episode 1 of 2 today. We're going to have a Mailbag Friday coming up later on tonight, but wanted to make sure we at least gave you 3 episodes for this week. Been very busy with my other job and then also cleaning up the backyard. A lot of leaves to rake, and that has taken up some time after I've come home from work, and then also have to go back sometimes at night to work. So stayed pretty busy, but still wanted to make sure that I got you guys some podcast episodes before we hit the weekend. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors and FanDuel. We're very excited that they can sponsor today's episode and moving forward for that matter. I can't wait to look ahead to the Super Bowl for FanDuel and make some great picks. And also with cars, you're always going to have issues, right? Especially in the winter months, right? When you can have low tire pressure and your headlight. Well, my headlight's out right now, but you never have to worry with eBay Motors. They really can take care of you. There's a lot of confusing things that happen with car parts, and eBay Motors make sure that you are completely taken care of in any scenario that you may be dealing with. So eBay Motors and FanDuel, big sponsors today for just the first episode. And the next episode, we're going to have some other sponsors as well. But again, that's coming up later on tonight. To kick off the show today, I wanted to really start talking about a guy that maybe we haven't given enough time to this offseason. There really hasn't been a need to, if I'm being honest with you. There has been, I would say, certain scenarios that made sense to talk about this player. But for the most part, he was always going to be on the roster. For the most part, he was always going to be starting at that position. Wasn't really a need to have many segments dedicated to him. And that's Salvador Perez. Now, I'm sure those listening are going, well, there was that point in time where we talked about trading Salvador Perez and would there be suitors? I just never thought it was going to be likely for the offseason. He's coming off one of his worst offensive seasons. He's declined behind the plate. At the end of the day, I just didn't think that there was that much value in Salvador Perez coming off 2023. The difference is now that the Royals are actively gunning to win the AL Central this year. So trading away Salvador Perez and going with my guess, Freddie Fermin, as the everyday catcher behind the plate, it's an unknown commodity. And that's something that JJ Picollo has tried to eliminate this year, is the unknown. Can this guy be good? They want to know that guy can be good. And Salvador Perez is one of those players they're counting on to take on a lot of the offensive workload. He's going to have to. I mean, he's going to be hitting anywhere from 4th, 5th, or 6th, and he can't turn in numbers that he did last year, and the Royals offense expect to be much better. You're glad that Bobby Witt Jr. is now busted onto the scene as a superstar. You're hoping MJ Melendez can bounce back, but he's still got to show it. You're hoping Vinny Pasquantino can stay healthy. Salvy's supposed to be that anchor a little bit of, even though the defense has declined, even though he's not a high OBP guy, the power's got to be there. And that's where I'm wondering, with better chances to come up to the plate with protection might boost those odds of him performing much better than he did in 2023. I'm not saying this lineup is night and day different, but adding Vinny Pasquantino back is huge. Adding more of a sure thing like Hunter Renfroe is huge. And then you put those guys in front of and behind Salvador Perez in the lineup, he can see better pitches sometimes. Because when there's nobody behind Salvador Perez, when there's not a legitimate threat, they're not going to throw him anything he can hit. And his approach at the plate is, I'm swinging at everything. He's a bad ball hitter. And that's the way he's always been. That's never going to change as a part of his game. But I do think this can be a really, really good year for Salvador Perez, assuming he can stay healthy. Because that, to me, even more so than Vinny Pasquantino, is what I'm concerned about. Because for the last 5 years, there's always been something. Because in his early parts of his career, I mean, this is with anybody, really. You're in your early 20s, your mid-20s, you get banged up a little bit, you can play through it. Now, Salvy, entering his age 34 season, he still tries to, but there's been more nagging problems. And then that can really decline the overall numbers late in your career. When he's behind the plate and he's dealing with hand injuries, remember he had the thumb injury, the ligament thing, the knee problem back in 2018. He had Tommy John in 19. Now he's got the eye problem, the blurred vision thing that pops up from time to time. It's a lot of things going on with Salvador Perez. So health, to me, is what can turn this into the old version of Salvador Perez. I mean, I'm not expecting him to go have the 2021 version of himself, nearly 50 home runs from a catcher. But you get into that 30 to 35 range, that's when I'm starting to go, all right, I know that the OBP numbers are going to be low. I know the defense isn't going to be fantastic, but Salvador Perez can be that guy in your lineup that when he's rolling, when he's hot, it can make everybody better around him. When he's just the only guy hitting and there's nobody to drive in, I think his value really goes down. But I almost think the Royals can get creative a little bit as to where they hit him at. I did some digging in some numbers yesterday about Salvador Perez. Surprisingly, he's not that great of a 4-hole hitter, which is where he has been the large part of his career post-2015. You think power hitter, nearly 50 home runs. Well, he's got to hit 4th, right? I don't think it's that simple. In fact, I believe the best spot in the lineup for him, and he's gotten a substantial amount of time there, is either the 6th spot or the 5 spot. I think the 5 spot is more doable. I do believe they're going to put him in the 4-hole to begin the year just because that's what baseball teams do, unless you're really just trying to shake up the lineup. I'd imagine it's going to be Michael Garcia. They could go with Vinny Pasquantino too, and then Bobby Witt Jr., but this is when they can get creative. They could go maybe MJ in the 4-hole or MJ in the 2-hole and Vinny in the 4-hole. Then you got Salvy in the 5-hole, Hunter Renfroe or Nelson Velasquez right behind him. That's where I think you can really start to take some of that 4-hole pressure off of Salvador Perez. And now you could argue and say, well, why not give it to a guy who's been there a lot? And you're saying to put the pressure on MJ Melendez? Doesn't make too much sense. I'm just saying you can get creative with it. Sometimes when a guy's slumping and he's not hitting in the 4-hole, it's a mental part of it. And when you're forcing too much, you're pressing too much, it can lead to injuries, which has been a concern for Salvador Perez over the last 3 to 4 years. So health, to me, that can lead to the year of Salvador Perez. If the Royals are out of it and he's playing really well, there's a trade piece. That's when his value, in my opinion, would be much higher than it was in the offseason. But if they're rolling, if they're in playoff contention, I'd imagine it's because Salvador Perez has returned to that offensive form. So to me, it's all about health. He stays healthy, I think we're going to see a much better version of him than we saw in 2023. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I want to revisit that trade the Royals made to clear open space for Adam Frazier on the 40-man roster. Do I agree with it? Do I think it was the right player? I'll let you know next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And eBay Motors is going to take care of headlights, which is what I just said. I'm dealing with my car. LED headlights. Things always happen in the winter. And thankfully, we're getting into warmer weather. It's been better in Kansas City. But I'm tired of dealing with car troubles, and eBay Motors can make sure that they got me covered, and I know they're going to have you covered. So the Royals made a trade back in the early parts of the week. I wanted to get a podcast episode done on that day. Just didn't really get a chance to get around to it because of work. And as I said, working on my backyard, lots of leaves back there. And so that's taken up a chunk of my week. But not to worry, this is episode 1 of 2 today. Wanted to get an episode in before I head off to work. And then when I get back from work, more work on the yard. And then I'll get you guys the Mailbag Friday episode that I know a lot of people look forward to throughout the week. But also a reminder that next Monday, that's when we're going to be going back to 5 episodes a week for the next 10 months. So we are going to have you covered daily on the Locked On Royals channel, which is what we really pride ourselves on. We're the only podcast out there that's going to give you Royals content Monday through Friday. We love it. I love talking about this team and can't wait to talk more about this team when we actually have baseball to go over, which we finally have baseball now coming up later this month to kick off spring training. But back to this trade that was made. The Royals had to clear up space on the 40-man roster, and they decided to make Samad Taylor that casualty. Samad Taylor, they acquired in the Whit Merrifield deal with Max Castillo, and now both of those guys no longer with the Royals, and they didn't really get much in return. The Royals are getting either a player to be named later or cash for Samad Taylor. Nobody thought the Royals were getting much for Samad Taylor. Now, I did see some mixed reactions to a deal like this because the Adam Frazier deal hasn't really been thought highly of, to be honest with you. The Adam Frazier deal is a bit of a head scratcher to a lot of people because you had Michael Massey, because you had Garrett Hampson. Did it really make too much sense to go out there and bring in another left-handed hitting super utility guy that doesn't hit for a lot of power? He's not a super high OBP guy. Didn't make too much sense. I took it as the Royals want depth. They want competition at second base. They're not going to hand that job to Michael Massey in the way that I really thought they were. I thought that they really liked Michael Massey at second. They brought in Garrett Hampson to be the super utility guy, and Nick Lofton was going to get a chance too, but coming off the bench. Now it screams to me, second base is open. It could be Lofton, it could be Frazier, maybe it's even Hampson, or it could be Massey. It's going to be about 4 players battling for that second base spot. And Adam Frazier, he played 141 games last year for Baltimore. So I don't really see him in a role where he only plays 20 to 30 games this year. He's going to get some significant playing time in Kansas City. And the Royals are hoping he returns closer to his 2021 form than his 2023 form that he had last year with the Baltimore Orioles. Samad Taylor, though, I liked him. I thought he was a great story. I thought that there was some really good aspects to his game that are, I guess, attractive to trade partners, which Seattle clearly saw that. I don't think Samad Taylor is going to get a lot of playing time in Seattle. He may have a couple of times that he comes up from AAA and provides some depth for the Mariners. But Samad Taylor was never going to get an everyday spot in Kansas City. Not this year, not next year. I don't believe the year after that. You're talking about a guy that was always going to be a bench guy. And the Royals didn't really seem like they were going to clear a 40-man roster spot by DFAing or trading a pitcher to make spot for Adam Frazier. They wanted to kind of replace, Samad Taylor with a guy that could do a lot of what he does. Samad Taylor could play second. He could play left. Adam Frazier can play second in the outfield. It kind of feels interchangeable. And the only other guys that can do that on the 40-man roster, Nick Lofton. You're not trading Nick Lofton. It appears now you're not going to. And Garrett Hampson. You just signed Garrett Hampson to a major league deal. You're not going to DFA him after doing that. It's a waste of money. I just think that some fans read a little bit too much into what a player could become. Samad Taylor's younger. He's cheaper. I get it, right? I absolutely get that Samad Taylor long-term could be more beneficial than Adam Frazier. But my question is to those that are against trading Samad Taylor, does Samad Taylor make the 2024 Royals better, or does Adam Frazier make them better? I would argue that a guy who's been an all-star before, 4 seasons of an OBP north of 340, he's been there. He had 13 home runs and a career high in RBIs, career high in home runs for that matter, for a 101 win Baltimore team last year. There is some merit to that, I believe. And these are moves I don't get too caught up in. And I get the stigma of Royals trading guys and then they take off elsewhere. If it happens for Samad Taylor, good for him. I'm actually rooting for him. He's an awesome guy. He had a walk-off in his first career game. Loved seeing him play. But the numbers were also not great after that game. He hit 200 for the Royals. And he's also an aging prospect. He's not super old, but he's not some 21, 22-year-old that really can develop, down in the minor leagues, and he could take a spot moving forward. Like, I look at it and go, I'm much more excited about Javier Vaz than I ever was about Samad Taylor. I mean, where was Samad Taylor ever going to play? It probably wasn't going to be second base, and that would have gone against what J.J. Picollo was preaching all off season. They don't want uncertainty. Samad Taylor is an uncertainty. Adam Frazier is not. Even if Adam Frazier turns in the exact same numbers he did for Baltimore, it's probably better than what Samad Taylor was going to give you. I think this is more so of a stain on the handling of the Whit Merrifield trade, which I voiced my concerns with on Twitter. You can follow me there at JohnnyJ_15. That was a terrible trade with Whit Merrifield. They completely, and they'd done this multiple times, and it's the old Royals front office run by Dayton Moore. Not saying J.J. Picollo had no part in it, but the Royals had their most valuable player, in my opinion, in Whit Merrifield. And they decided to keep him in 100 lost seasons. They kept him in 18. They kept him in 19. That was when he was at his best. In 2020, shortened year, I get it. You don't, trade him away. 2021, good again, decided to hang on to him. 2022, numbers weren't as good, traded him for Max Castillo, Samad Taylor, and this is what always bugged me about the Dayton Moore era. And it's different now, the J.J. Picollo era, because he may get a guy that's close to Major League ready and then also a lottery ticket guy. Cole Reagans, you had Rody Cabrera in the Aroldis Chapman deal. Dayton Moore always went after Major League ready guys. Max Castillo was Major League ready. He wasn't very good. Samad Taylor was Major League ready. He didn't really pop when he came to Kansas City. Now both those guys are out of the organization, so you got nada. You got nothing for Whit Merrifield, unless the Royals player to be named later coming in this Samad Taylor deal, who's not going to be on the 40-man roster, all of a sudden turns into this lottery ticket gem. And then you could say, oh, well, the Whit Merrifield deal kind of by a couple of pieces down the road became a worthy trade. But that's what bugged me so much about this. was that they didn't get much value for arguably one of their most valuable pieces in the down years. And that was what frustrated me so much, that the Royals didn't want to admit they were rebuilding, held on to guys until their value was gone, and then traded them for guys that didn't turn into anything. Now, that's baseball. You're never going to be able to truly predict what a player is going to become. And I'm sure that there were multiple scouts saying Max Castillo could be, a number 4, number 5 starter, and Samad Taylor drew comparisons to Whit Merrifield with a little bit more power. It didn't turn out to be that way. At the end of the day, you move on from it. It's a trade that happened in the past. I'm just not losing much sleep over this one. I'm happy for Samad Taylor getting a chance in Seattle. I think that's great for him. I just don't think he was ever going to become what I thought originally he was going to. The Royals want more sure things. Adam Frazier's more of a sure thing than Samad Taylor. Were there guys that maybe I would have been a little bit more okay with parting with in the 40-man roster? Sure. Bullpen arms. I mean, those are always, interchangeable to me, the guys that just can't really stick long term. But we're also seeing now that some of the guys the Royals DFA'd that we thought were going to be really good elsewhere. I mean, Colin Snyder. I was really high on Colin Snyder because of his overall stuff, the advanced numbers on him. Arizona picks him up on waivers, DFA'd him a month later. It's not always going to be the doom and gloom that we think they are. And sometimes when the Royals move guys off their 40-man roster, it is the right move. But do you agree or disagree with that trade of Samad Taylor to Seattle to clear up a 40-man roster spot for Adam Frazier? Before we hit our break and enter our final segment of episode 1 today, let's give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. When we return, I am going to talk about this farm system a little bit and the lack of top 100s. It's got to change now, and it's got to change in a hurry. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Also, be sure to download our podcast and wherever you listen to your podcast, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're also on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other title sponsor today in FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring, the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I've already got my plan mapped out. Of course, being a Chiefs fan, being here in Kansas City, living in Kansas City all of my life, I'm probably going to put some money down on this game, and I'm going to go through FanDuel, which I believe is the best app to use when placing your bets. And if you're wondering about it, if you're concerned about losing money, don't be concerned, okay? Find what you're good at. Find the prop bets. Find the best odds there. If you're just wanting to add a little bit of money, make the safe bet. If you want to bet with your heart, I advise against it because you never want to lose and then lose money on top of that. But see what the experts are saying. See what the best odds are. See what everybody else is betting on. FanDuel leads you right to those great bets, and it's so fun to use. They've got so many ways to end the season with a W or 2 or 3 of them. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. Again, those are prop bets, and those are my favorite things to bet on. New customers that join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I can't wait for the Super Bowl, right? So don't waste any more time. Go over to FanDuel, create your account, and start placing some bets before the big game next Sunday. Well, back to the Royals here. We just went over the Samad Taylor deal and finding prospects and making sure you hit on prospects. It's fitting that our first episode today, 1 of 2, episode 2 will be later on tonight, a Mailbag Friday. It's very fitting to me that we just saw the Baltimore Orioles last night acquire their ace in Corbin Burnes, one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. And they didn't even give up one of their 5 top 100 guys. Joey Ortiz and DL Hall. I think great prospects, but it's also how loaded that farm system is. And Mike Elias has done this not once, but twice. He won Executive of the Year with Baltimore last year. He turned the worst overall foundation, I would say, back in 2018 and 19 into a powerhouse in the American League, not only today, but for years to come. And what the Orioles have done a great job of is just stockpiling their farm system. You have 5, 6, 7 top 100s, and you're winning 100 games. That's Houston Astros level. Now, they're nowhere near Houston right now. They didn't even win a playoff game last year. So there's a ways to go for Baltimore, but they've set themselves up so perfectly. And whereas the Royals, who had their rebuild start at the same time as Baltimore, they got one top 100. And he's barely in the top 100, and it's Blake Mitchell. I do believe the Royals have a lot of under-the-radar prospects now. A lot of guys that the scouts found that I do believe can be good Major League Baseball players. But they don't have any superstars right now, in my opinion. They got to develop a lot of these guys. Where Baltimore, they were hitting on pretty much every pick they had rounds 1 through 3. And why it's so important for the Royals now. You know, we all feel good about the offseason. They're trying to go win now, trying to compete in the American League Central. What Baltimore has is what nobody else really has right now. A great major league team, a great farm system. And it gives you so much flexibility. San Diego was another team that had this. They had a great major league team and a great farm system. Now, San Diego, whose window is all but closed now, you know, they mortgaged their future to go all in on 1 year. It didn't work out. I could see Baltimore doing the same thing this trade deadline. I don't think they're ever going to part ways with Jackson Holliday. He's going to be maybe just as good as a Gunnar Henderson or an Adley Rutschman. So they're still trying to build their major league roster with the homegrown talent they have. But I look at what the Royals are doing. It's good for the now. They're trying to compete now. But how this team pulls itself out, and they've added a lot of new names in the front office, new scouts, that's going to help. You start hitting on draft picks, then it puts you in this great, and I mean a great situation like Baltimore's in. Now, you're fun, you're winning games at the big league level, and then when you want to make that move, like the Royals did back with, you know, Will Myers and Jake Odorizzi, and going out there getting James Shields and Wade Davis, and then going after Johnny Cueto in 2015, parting ways with Brandon Finnegan, John Lamb, and Cody Reed, they had pieces to give. Not all those guys turned out to be something or as good as the Royals once thought, but it gives you that flexibility. Hey, you can hang on to these prospects and you can continue to build, but when you want to go all in, like the Orioles did with Corbin Burns, you can do that. And the good thing for the Orioles, they were able to not part ways with any of their top 5 guys in the system. Here is the difference, though. Corbin Burns is likely going to be in Baltimore for 1 year. That's why they were able to part ways with DL Hall and Joey Ortiz to Milwaukee, because Milwaukee wasn't getting an extension done with Corbin Burns. He would have been there for 1 year, and then you're banking on winning the World Series, which I don't think Milwaukee is. So they got young, controllable prospects, a little bit older, both 25 years old, but that's why the return was a little bit light. You know, if Corbin Burns had 2 or 3 more years of club control, they would have to part ways with a couple of those top 100 guys. For the Royals' sake, though, for those people asking me about Devin Williams, in my opinion, the best closer in baseball right now, even more so than Josh Hader, they just don't have the resources to go make trades like that. But it's got to start this year. Maybe you can start from last year's group, developing them in the top 100s, but you got to start hitting. You got to start hitting on these guys, and I'm hoping that Brian Bridges, a couple of the new names they brought over to help the front office, to help the scouting department, it's not going to be as many swings and misses, because the swings and misses are what's going to keep the Royals in this spot, sputtering in the mud. I think this team's going to be much better this year, but along with improving the major league team, improving this farm system, in my opinion, is arguably just as important. Well, that's going to do it for episode 1 of 2 today on Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and download our podcast on wherever you listen to your podcast: Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye for the first episode today, shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Until we bring you Mailbag Friday later on tonight, you take it easy, Kansas City.